Forbes journalists talk about a counteroffensive by the Ukrainian armed forces on the critical Pokrovske direction. They cite not only Ukrainian, but also, and no less importantly, Russian sources. Russian propagandists and military bloggers talk about the appearance of Ukrainian army reserve forces near Pokrovsk, which significantly slowed down the Russian aggressors' offensive in this critical area for Ukraine. Of course, journalists emphasize that nothing is likely to change near Pokrovsk in a matter of days or even weeks. However, now the Russian troops, whose commanders were confident that Pokrovsk was in their pocket, have to make difficult decisions, not only to develop their offensive, but also to hold the positions they managed to take during the previous round of fighting. And in this way, several myths used by Russian propaganda are refuted at once, which, by the way, are also perceived in Ukrainian society. One of these myths is that the Russian offensive in the Donetsk region will be a cakewalk. No, it will not be. As you can see, the Ukrainian command had its own calculations about the possibility of stabilizing the front and the emergence of reserve forces that could stop the Russians at a time when Vladimir Putin, at least for the moment, does not have the additional forces to develop the offensive at the pace it has been going on for the past months. Secondly, the fact that the Ukrainian army's offensive in the Kursk sector has slowed down Ukrainian capabilities in Pokrovsk. And as Vladimir Putin has repeatedly tried to prove, Ukraine launched the offensive in the Kursk region of the Russian Federation to divert attention from the Pokrovsk direction. In fact, the reality was different, because the Kursk direction involved much fewer forces than those needed to stop the Russian army's offensive in Donetsk region. And so, against the backdrop of the offensive of the Ukrainian armed forces in the Kursk region of the Russian Federation and the consolidation of the Ukrainian army's positions in the Kursk region, reserves were being prepared to stop the Russian army's actions in the Donetsk region. It can be said that in both cases, there is a common denominator. The Russian army is delaying the deployment of positions in the Kursk region of the Russian Federation, precisely because Putin does not yet have enough forces to simultaneously operate on the Donetsk, Kharkiv, and Kursk directions of the Russian-Ukrainian front. And every day of this delay allows the Ukrainian armed forces to build fortifications that will be difficult enough for the Russian armed forces to storm. This means that even if Vladimir Putin gathers a strong grouping on the Kursk direction in order to drive Ukrainian troops out of the sovereign territory of the Russian Federation, he will have to accept a significant number of casualties among Russian soldiers who will try to enter Sudzha and other towns and villages in the Kursk region. But in the Pokrovsk sector, the Russian army's delay in attacking means that Ukrainian troops are getting more time to gain a foothold in new positions. This will mean that even if Russian troops manage to regain the initiative and try to get to Pokrovsk, they will suffer much greater losses than they did before, when their offensive continued unopposed by the fresh forces deployed by the Ukrainian command to stop this bold march of the aggressor. Thus, we can talk about the exhaustion of those Russian forces that Vladimir Putin has now inflicted on the Donetsk direction of the Russian-Ukrainian front, and the potential exhaustion of those forces that are now gathering in the Kursk region of the Russian Federation in order to fulfill Putin's order and drive Ukrainian troops out of the Kursk region. But an order is an order. We remember that back in February 2022, Vladimir Putin ordered his armed forces to move to the administrative borders of Donetsk and Luhansk regions. After all, it was then, in February 2022, that Putin recognized the so-called independence of the Donetsk and Luhansk People's Republics, invented in the Kremlin on the territory of the Ukrainian regions. Putin decided to recognize their independence not within the borders that were then under the control of the Russian aggressor and its vile henchmen and collaborators in the Ukrainian Donbass, but within the administrative borders of the regions. That is, within the borders controlled by the legitimate Ukrainian authorities, not by the Russian military and bandits. And it was then that the Russian-Ukrainian war began. But 2.5 years have passed, and we are discussing the operation of Russian troops in the Pokrovsk direction. That is, there is no hope for the imminent capture of the entire Donetsk region of Ukraine by troops loyal to Vladimir Putin. And the same thing could happen in the Kursk region. Vladimir Putin may believe that his troops will quickly drive Ukrainian troops out of this Russian region, but in reality, this will simply lead to a significant number of casualties among Russian soldiers. And this is quite important for the Ukrainian army. We understand that the demographic balance of Ukraine and the Russian Federation is not comparable, which is why we need to disable as many Russian military as possible, to prevent the continuation of aggressive actions with their participation, to force Putin to announce such a mobilization that will lead to social discontent in the Russian Federation. After all, we know that the dictator is trying to prevent such a development, which could lead to a change in the attitude of Russians to this aggressive war, which they are still watching from their old Soviet ditches. And of course, in this situation, the brave actions of the Ukrainian army in the Pokrovske direction, which stopped the Russian aggressor, help to destroy as many occupiers as possible who have come with their dirty boots on Ukrainian soil. Thank you, friends. Stay on this channel, subscribe to it. This was Hustler. Until we meet again.